Hello everybody and welcome back to the United Stand. I am joined with Ben Jacobs, transfer expert and journalist. I am very excited to have him back on the show. Going to be talking all things Manchester United news and transfer news. Hopefully looking ahead to a big summer. The managerial appointment will be key. The B&B show is back. We're not in person this time round, but we're still going to bring a good show for you guys. But look, Ben, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks a lot. Yeah, we set the bar high last time with my Manchester appearance and now back in an undisclosed hotel. So remote show, but hopefully we can share some new information.
Do you know what it is, Ben? You're clearly the good luck charm in the studio. You went away and then we lost. How unfortunate is that? I mean, speaking of that loss, I think football is so reactionary anyway, and especially at a club like Manchester United, when there's such a big spotlight on you, football can be reactionary. However, fans have noticed there has been a little bit of a drop-off in terms of form and performance in the last 3 or 4 games, we would say. I think the Everton game, to be fair, was a good result, but apart from that, there has been a little bit of a drop-off. I mean, speaking of the managerial candidates going into the summer, where does Carrick rank? And is this why that INEOS and the board want to do that thorough process?
Yeah, exactly. And as I've said before, Michael Carrick hasn't got several fronts to fight on to really force his way into the equation. So the starting point was very much your head coach by name, not interim, but until the end of the season. And that's still the case. So if Michael Carrick was to win all of his remaining games, he would of course force his way into the process. And I think people were maybe getting a bit carried away because that was kind of the tone that was set by winning those 2 really difficult games to begin with, a Manchester derby and beating Arsenal. But there's never, even as of now, been enough data to really compare Carrick to some of the other candidates and CVs that are expected to form this process. So it's one thing feeling like Amarim's gone, there's a honeymoon period, and Michael Carrick's got this so-called Manchester United DNA, which a lot of people at Manchester United like to use. And yet there was always going to be a thorough process. And at the moment, I don't think we can call Michael Carrick the front runner. We can't say that he's out of the process either. But what we're starting to see, as you rightly allude to over the last few games, even ones where Manchester United have taken points, and definitely the loss to Newcastle United is a bit of a dip in form, which is normal because players, despite naturally wanting to win, wanting to at times almost autopilot and qualify for Champions League football, start with a boost because it's in the aftermath of Ruben Amorim departing. And then as the season comes to a close, some know they're leaving the club. Others wonder who the new manager is. Different players are suddenly out of favour or in different positions and they don't like it. And that's always the challenge for an interim manager, experienced or not. It will be the same at Tottenham Hotspur with Igor Tudor as well.
It could be worse. It could be worse for Manchester United.
It could be a lot worse. They're only 1 point above the relegation zone. And that's the sort of irony. I've said it so many times. I know now I sound like a broken record, but Ruben Amorim, in terms of league table position, didn't leave Manchester United in a disastrous place. So Carrick's got one job, really, and I'm sure that he's got quite tunnel vision about it. And that's to qualify for the Champions League, because even under Ruben Amorim, that was the aim. If he does that, he can sit back and find out how high or low he is in this thorough process. But he knows for sure that as he manages games, and even if he wins games, Manchester United are definitely going to be speaking to other candidates.
Who else is in the race, do you think, Ben, in terms of other candidates? Because I've heard some rumours about Julian Nagelsmann being interested in the job and him being on the list. And it was interesting because I was watching The Overlap earlier today, and Gareth Bale was talking about how he thinks Carlo Ancelotti would be a brilliant option for Manchester United. He's got the personality, he knows the tactical side of the game. But that's kind of been ruled out due to his alliance with the Brazilian national team. I mean, who are the other candidates that Manchester United will be looking at?
Yeah, I think the challenge for Manchester United with Ancelotti or, of course, Tuchel is they've both signed new deals. And with Ancelotti, we revealed that right here on the United stand. So 2030 for Ancelotti and Thomas Tuchel confirmed for the Euros. And the last thing that you want to do if you're running this process is kind of gamble on the World Cup not going according to plan for one or both of those managers, and then they suddenly become available. And there is always an outside chance that somebody signs a new deal, and it's a protection mechanism. I think part of why the FA moved so early to get Thomas Tuchel to extend is because if anyone comes in for him now, they basically get all of their money back because compensation would be required. But Manchester United are not particularly cynical, and nor are other clubs, about the extensions of Tuchel and Ancelotti. They think they're staying beyond this World Cup, and as a consequence, they're not in the process. And if you wanted to wait it out, you'd have to make a very late appointment to see whether the perspective of each of those FAs changed. So they're out the race for now. Roberto De Zerbi, I'm still led to believe, is a candidate. It will be interesting to see how he fits in Manchester United's model, but the model could adapt. And of course, De Zerbi still worked under quite a rigid and data-led model with many cooks during his time at Brighton and Hove Albion. Julian Nagelsmann is another name that I would expect to form part of Manchester United's thinking. And at the moment, we're led to believe that he is looking for a club option after the World Cup. And then you have a few other names that we can only really say form part of the process before Ruben Amorim got the job. Kieran McKenna was one. I'm not led to believe that he's a front runner at the moment, but INEOS was still kind of inputting and he was appreciated at the time. Mauricio Pochettino is perhaps more likely to go back to Tottenham. And you know what? That might even happen should Spurs go down. It would be more about the finances and affording Pochettino, but I don't think he would necessarily be put off going into the Championship with Tottenham, feeling like they'd still be in a strong position to come back up, and they're not down yet. But again, Pochettino formed part of the process before Ruben Amorim was appointed. I've mentioned the fact that internally Roberto Martinez was a name who's had data run on him. Now you may know I said
that went quite big.
Well, exactly. And you may note at the time that I said this is going to be taken out of context on social media. I'm not led to believe they've made any formal contact. And I'm also not led to believe that he's a front runner. And well-run clubs will have perhaps as many as 12 names that they're looking at in terms of their style and philosophy. Obviously, in Martinez's case, he has played a back three before in the past, but at Portugal, he's also favoured a 4-4-3.
Sorry, bless me.
Sort of names that are just going through this internal process of having data looked at to kind of stack them up so they know, okay, who's a stylistic fit, who's a personality fit, who's going to be somebody that could come in for the long run. Again, Gareth Southgate, we know that as far as Jim Ratcliffe is concerned, he really likes him as a person. But at this stage, we can't read into the Steve Holland appointment as a Trojan horse to suggest that Southgate is kind of trying before he buys through Holland and then might be a candidate for the summer. If anything, I'm led to believe that Southgate doesn't even know yet if he's prepared to take any club football job. So De Zerbi, Nagelsmann, both expected to be on the list. Tuchel would have been there had he not extended at England. And Ancelotti, I've never really been led to believe that Ancelotti was looking for Manchester United or Manchester United were looking for Ancelotti. And obviously the last name is just Luis Enrique, and nothing really to add at this stage other than to stress that suggestions his contract expires in summer 2026 are wide of the mark. It's a 2027 contract. And this idea that PSG have already tried and failed to get Luis Enrique to extend are also wrong to my understanding as well. My information is that PSG are still trying, and the French club's perspective, and it is only their perspective, is even if he rejects their advances to sign a new long-term contract, which is plan A, you'll still have a willingness from PSG to keep him until his contract expires in summer 2027. And then, of course, you've got all of the Premier League managers that may or may not become available. We know that Oliver Glasner's leaving. I'm not led to believe that he's a contender now. Maybe a stronger profile when Amorim was still at the club and the feeling was that they might stick with a back three. Andoni Iraola and Marco Silva are the other two. I think if Man United went for one of those two names, it would more likely be Iraola than Silva at this stage, but neither of them, as it stands anyway, seem as high in Manchester United's early thinking as some of the other candidates that I've outlined.
Well, that's a really good run through of everybody who at this moment in time seems to be part of the process. Of course, other names can come into the forefront. We are early on in the process, but that was a really good rundown of where we're at. And depending on how Carrick does, he will probably be part of that as well after the interim period. So let's see how we get on for the rest of the season. You know, my dream is Luis Enrique. Doesn't seem very likely by the information you've just given me, but I'll keep dreaming.
Money can talk, but it needs a willingness from Luis Enrique. And right now, as you say, it's so early. And of course, he's focused on trying to beat Chelsea and defend that Champions League title. But the point with Luis Enrique is he's not the kind of rash manager to make a decision now about his future, either regarding seeing out his PSG contract, exploring an extension to that PSG contract, or leaving. And what I can tell you is when he interviewed at Chelsea, it was I'm flying to you. I want to meet you face to face. And when he had that interview with Chelsea, he came armed with several binders of his own data and information. And my information about that Chelsea interview was that it was an extremely two-way conversation where Luis Enrique was effectively interviewing the Chelsea ownership and leadership as much, if not more, as they were interviewing him. And Luis Enrique went away from that conversation, despite all of his research and binders and being intrigued by the Premier League, and basically said no to Chelsea. You have not passed my interview process. So if there was to be an approach to Luis Enrique, it's worth pointing out that his desire to engage, whether he stays or goes, would come later, but also that would likely be exactly the same in a very two-way process and a test in many ways from Enrique's perspective of what exactly this Manchester United project is all about.
Well, yeah, that's the next point I wanted to touch on, and we are going to get into Elliot, Anderson, Tonali, all that sort of stuff. So stay tuned, everyone. Smash a like on the video, get your comments in. Let's get interactive. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. But I wanted to move into, the model at Manchester United, Ousmane Berrada, Jason Wilcox, Christopher Vivell, and the way that things are structured. We're very clear it is a head coach. That is the words that are often used by Manchester United, head coach over manager. And it seems to be that they are striving for that footballing structure where the manager is the head coach, and that they will have that direct communication to Jason Wilcox. He will then have that direct communication to Ousmane Berrada. Christopher Vivell fits into that. Do you think if Manchester United wanted to go for someone like an Enrique, even perhaps, a De Zerbi, like you said, in a way, he would probably need a little bit more control. Do you think they would be willing to change that structure a little bit, or do you think they are set on it?
No, I think there's 2 points here. One is the philosophy or the model, and the other is the people involved in the model. And naturally, Jason Wilcox kind of got the promotion due to the work he'd done, but also the departure of Dan Ashworth, and the knock-on effect in many ways of Ashworth leaving was a temporary role for Christopher Vivell that then resulted in permanence, and suddenly Vivell and Wilcox are kind of hand in hand in running the recruitment show. And whether they stay or go in the medium or long run, it doesn't necessarily change the model that's being built. And Manchester United want that model to be collaborative. They don't want a manager. And my feeling, speaking to sources, is that won't change, because it would be a huge U-turn, even if it feels like it's just semantics, to suddenly call the next new coach of Manchester United a manager again, because manager traditionally at this football club has been associated with autonomy, and Erik ten Hag had a veto. So I think the head coach will remain, and that's very much a strategic shift to say that this club can't rely on manager after manager to go out in the market to have their say as to what they want that is perfect for their system and their style, because otherwise the manager leaves and you keep having to do open heart surgery, not just based on your recruitment or your wider philosophy or your style, or even to an extent your brand, which sometimes can tie into the football side. You have to constantly re-recruit for what might be a completely different personality with a different system and style. So there's been a very clear split saying now to the head coach of Manchester United, you focus on the football, which is why even when it wasn't going great, Ruben Amorim was still able to persist for so long with his back three. And then this model working around that system will ultimately continue regardless of who the personnel are. And I don't think any manager can come in and say, give me back the veto, or repave the squad in a completely different direction. Because even though Amorim and then Carrick and whoever may come in next may appear to be shifting stylistically, because Manchester United are playing a back four, Bruno Fernandes was deeper under Ruben Amorim. Amorim wanted a wing back on the left side. We'll have to wait and see whether Manchester United go down that direction or just a left winger. But those are smaller points. And if you actually look at the bigger picture here, the style that Manchester United play, the intensity, the pressing, the midfield revamp that is coming up, a signing like Benjamin Sesko, which was intended for the long term, a broader desire to lower the average age of the squad, a feeling that Manchester United can do better in recruiting and bringing through homegrown talent to try and get back to where they were in the late 90s and the early 2000s, pathways, heavier emphasis on data, because there wasn't much of a connection really, even though it feels like when you look at all these famous Man United players that have come through the academy, that was very much down to just outstanding gut instinct and scouting and development and, at the time, infrastructure. But now what you need on top of all of that is modernization of all of your facilities to attract young talent, and then clear pathways. And some of those pathways, when you want to guarantee them to players, are informed by data. And a lot of that, I'm not saying it's so weak or so absent, because Manchester United is still one of the biggest and most advanced clubs in the world. But if you compare it even to a Brighton or a Brentford and now a Chelsea and definitely a Manchester City and an Arsenal, it was all lacking at the point when INEOS came in. So those parts of the model may feel boring because they're not wins, they're not trophies, and they're not instant, but they'll all remain. And once you put all those departments in place to assess things like scouting based on data, as well as gut instinct, injury prevention, set pieces, modernization of all of your facilities, etc., you add all of those up and eventually you'll get a return, but it won't necessarily be overnight. If overnight you suddenly say to a manager, ignore the data, don't worry about what the medical experts say, it's irrelevant if we think we've got a great pathway. If you don't want to use that young player, then just shun them and we'll sell them at any point. We've got all of our academy and youth teams playing one system, but fine, change the formation. We want two midfielders, but you don't want a midfielder. So let's instead put all of that money on another forward. Then suddenly you undo all of that slow burning work before you actually see it come to fruition. And this is why personnel could change, but I'm not anticipating the Manchester United model will.
I think that was a really good breakdown of what INEOS are trying to do, because we focus on results, we focus on performance, and I think that's absolutely normal for a fan base. But when you look beneath the surface, they are all things that needed to change, and hopefully they are all changing in the right direction. And like you said, you might get a different director of football. For example, Dan Ashworth went out, but Christopher Vivell is now in, but that model will remain. So I think that's cleared a few things up for quite a lot of fans, and it was a kind of thorough explanation, which was good. And then speaking
one of the things that's worth pointing out, though, is that on the negative side, as the financial results keep showing, part of the model has to be, how is this football club going to deal with the ever-growing debt? So we constantly see the angle of reduction in workforce and cost cutting, which has led to more of an operational profit. And that's great, because it might mean that they can get through the final year of PSR and inter-squad costs ratio. But in the long run, they also have to show how that debt is going to disappear. And it doesn't have to entirely disappear, by the way, because with revolving credit, if you chip away at that 1.3 billion in debt and get it down to, say, 300 million, you might want to use revolving credit to then go on another massive drive in the market. And then you've obviously proven that the debt can go up and down and up and down and slowly be chipped away to a normal amount for many football clubs that have to rely on credit and are sometimes in debt. And then if over time, season on season, you get into the Champions League, you can eventually eradicate the debt entirely and you've got a sustainable football club. But if they modernise everything, spend on a new stadium, revamp Carrington, which is excellent, by the way, even do a big midfield revamp that excites everyone over the summer. If every single time we see the annual books, that 1.3 is 1.5 to 2 to 2.5, then the model is eventually still going to be undone by the debt. So that's still an unanswered question and something they have to address, even though people are more excited about who the football club is going to sign. And even though a lot of the modernisation and the new stadium plans are very positive, if they don't find a way of answering that key question of how are you doing all of this, which is great in many areas, but the debt is still rising, then they're not actually going to be a sustainable football club. And in this modern era, you have to be both successful and sustainable. Otherwise, you leave yourself in a very difficult position.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be really interesting to see how we get ourselves out of that amount of debt over the future of INEOS's era, combined with the Glazer ownership, whether that is through the new stadium, which looks as if it's not really even fully off the ground yet. I mean, we could talk about that in so much depth. It's Manchester United is absolutely huge, and there's so many different elements to it. I know you speak about the summer signings and everyone getting excited about them and the midfield rebuild. We are going to talk about it, Ben. We are going to talk about it because there was some news coming out earlier on today that shook me a little bit, and I thought, oh, I hope that's not true. So I'll ask it to Ben later on the show. There's been rumours kind of floating around that Elliot Anderson to Manchester City is basically a done deal already for the summer. I mean, what's your insight on that?
Yeah, I don't think it's a done deal. As we've said on previous shows, I think Manchester United view Elliot Anderson as a top target, but Manchester City do as well. And from City's perspective, Bernardo Silva is expected to depart. There's Saudi interest there, and a Benfica return is possible too. Silva's said for absolutely ages that he knows what he's doing, without quite confirming that he's definitely leaving Manchester City when his contract expires. And this, for me, is exactly the same as Kevin De Bruyne. It doesn't appear that there's a new contract offer, as of now anyway, on the table. So Silva goes, and they'll need one kind of midfielder. And then we'll have to look at the long-term future, even of Rodri as well. But anybody saying that Anderson is a done deal to either City or Manchester United are failing to understand that right now there's no price, because Forest are not engaging. And if you're a suitor trying to agree a price now, you'd basically be going to Nottingham Forest and saying, we'll give you a good number if you agree now, because everyone's going to lowball you if you go down, which is, of course, a distinct possibility based on the league table. And it's the same with Morgan Gibbs White as well. And some clubs, by the way, like Wolves with João Gomez potentially, or when they sold Strand Larsen over the winter, will entertain that, and it can pay off, because the money that Wolves got for Strand Larsen ahead of his move to Crystal Palace was excellent. And I would say 15-20 million more than if they'd have waited until the summer, when, if the league table remains as is, there'll be a championship club. But that's not taking into account the unique negotiator that Evangelos Marianakis is, coupled with the fact that his most senior recruitment expert, Edu, is being shunned. My understanding is that Edu, the former Arsenal sporting director, will leave Forest parent group as well. So you've suddenly got an owner carrying all of the autonomy who is going to have to revamp his recruitment team. And that would be the second revamp, because Ross Wilson had left for Newcastle United, coupled with the fact that if Forest go down, it's completely different terms, or it's certainly a very different negotiation. Because how can you expect the same kind of money when everybody knows that these players like Elliot Anderson and Morgan Gibbs White will in likelihood not want to stay in the Championship? So every single football club that goes down would be in a weaker position. So it's quite risky just to try and push and do the Elliot Anderson deal now, because prices could change more favourably. And from Anderson's perspective, he knows that he's going to have a pick of clubs. So I'm not aware of any done deal yet between Elliot Anderson and Manchester City. But what I can tell you is that City are prepared to start advancing things now, and maybe even enter into some kind of more formal talks to see exactly what is possible and how early that might be possible. But that's not new news. It's always been obvious that Manchester City would be in the race for Elliot Anderson, and Manchester United can respond to that. And I would not expect Manchester United to see Manchester City bulldoze forwards and just go, okay, we think we're going to lose this race because City are now serious and formal. And you've still got Chelsea as a potential dark horse as well. So we're going to have to be patient with the Elliot Anderson situation. But it's absolutely true that City are prepared to step up their interest. But as obvious as it sounds, so are Manchester United as well.
Yeah, I have a theory about Man City, Ben, just from like an outside fan perspective. And with everything going on with the potential charges of the 115, whether they'll get charged, how many of the charges will go through, and what the punishment will be, we don't know, because there's no full resolution on that yet. But if they would occur a transfer ban, which is possible, I have a feeling they're trying to get it all in now. Like, that's my feeling, because they went all in, Guéhi and Semenya in January. I mean, they are ambitious. They're an ambitious club, and it is frustrating because they are our noisy neighbours, and I want Manchester United to be the better club. I want us to be the more ambitious club. And they saw an opening for a potential title race, despite maybe not the start to the season they would have liked. They went for it in Semenya and Guéhi. It is paying off. They might not win the title, but they're absolutely in it. And again, it's like top targets. They'll just go and get them. When they got James Trafford, and then Donnarumma comes on the market, it doesn't matter. Best goalkeeper in the world, potentially. Let's go and get him. We didn't know he was going to be available. Let's go and do it. They're just ruthless, and they're so ambitious. And I think, say if they were to get a transfer ban, that would stunt them quite a lot. So let's spend as much as we can now and get everything set before that happens. That's just my theory.
Yeah, but they were active over the summer. They were active in the previous January. So some of Man City's movement in the market has been quite surprisingly reactionary, because they've looked at the midpoint of the season too. And they've realised that if they've got the money and the wage and the desire to add these, a lot of other people are not prepared to move in the winter. That was certainly the case with Liverpool and Mark Guéhi. So some of it is also just about arming Pep Guardiola with a squad that can get Champions League football. And if, as you say, the charges are to go against Man City and they deny any wrongdoing, then they will still want to have a squad equipped to get in the Champions League for next season and to compete on all fronts, regardless of whether they do or don't get any punishment. So some of this is just about Man City's tactic being bullish, knowing that they can offer big wages, and some players' heads are turned by that. That was definitely the case with Mark Guéhi. Antoine Semenyo just wanted to play under Pep Guardiola. Manchester United's tactic has been a bit different. They're taking money away from big wages, but actually compared to Man City, they're putting a lot of money towards transfer fees. And that's the kind of irony here, that if you add up what Man United were prepared to pay in terms of Brian and Bumo, starting at about 50-55 and feeling at the time that that might be quite competitive, them being led down a garden path in negotiations that 62.5, the Cunha release clause, would do it, and in the end paying 71. And if you think about the fee for Benjamin Sesko, if you go back a bit further, Rasmus Højlund, Man United are saying, and rightly, that the wage bill needs to come down. So people are fearing that if City chuck a load of money at Elliot Anderson and Manchester United don't, he's only going to pick the blue half of Manchester. But you've also got to deal with Evangelos Marianakis, and City are showing also in the same market that they don't always throw an astronomical transfer fee. So where Man United overpay on transfer fees, City are a bit more rigid historically in the market. And that's evidenced by the fact that the Guéhi fee was actually only 20 million. We were all led to believe at the time it was 20 million plus add-ons, but it was only 20 million. And that's not a bad deal. Antoine Semenyo had a release clause. City paid about 2.5 million above it to get better, more preferential payment terms. Ryan Cherky was done at a relatively decent fee. Donnarumma was quite good value for money because PSG wanted him out. So they have been quite disciplined in the market, whereas actually Manchester United have been willing to overpay in the eyes of other clubs at least. I know Man United wouldn't define it in that way, to get their players. And then when you look head to head, United wanted Mbumo, loads of competition. He said he only wanted Manchester United. Cunha had a lot of people willing to trigger the release clause. He said he only wanted Man United. Newcastle sent their ownership out to try and get Benjamin Sesko over the line. He said he only wanted Man United. Everybody said that Lenny Yoro was going to Real Madrid. Liverpool backed off and he went to Manchester United. Villa tried for Sene Lammens and he went to Manchester United. So you can take Semenya and a few others and say that the football club have lost out on targets, but the hit record of who Man United want versus who they've got is actually relatively decent as well. So I wouldn't cast the die yet with Elliot Anderson, but I am expecting a blue versus red half of Manchester battle, much like for Antoine Semenyo, and we'll wait and see what the player decides.
I hope it's Manchester United. I don't want to see Manchester City come out on top again. But also, I just think Elliot Anderson is one of the best players out there for what Manchester United need in their midfield rebuild. I mean, speaking about the midfield rebuild, Ben, a couple of names from the North East keep popping up. Bruno Guimarães, well, they're located in the northeast, they're not actually from the northeast. Bruno Guimarães and Sandro Tonali. I mean, we get linked to Newcastle players near enough every single day. I know we're not going to go and take their whole team.
Yeah.
I mean, we might do, but I don't think that'll happen. But Sandro Tonali, Bruno Guimarães, how true are the links to both? I mean, there was a report that Casemiro had recommended Bruno Guimarães to Manchester United, and then Sandro Tonali apparently is a top target for us now. That's what's been sort of making the round. So what's your perspective on it?
Yeah, I think, again, Sandro Tonali for me is quite difficult because the player wants Italy, and then that will be denied, partly because Newcastle want to make out like he's just happy and is going to stay, but also because there's not really an Italian club as of now that can afford Sandro Tonali. So I'm still led to believe from sources close to Tonali that if he had a dream pick, he is quite keen on going back to Italy. And again, that will get taken out of context on social media, but... and it's a very important caveat, can anybody match Newcastle's valuation and the player's financial demands? And at the moment, no, which makes the move to Italy very difficult, which is why maybe Newcastle feel he'll just stay, coupled with the fact that this doesn't appear to be Alexander Isak territory, because Tonali's very grateful for Newcastle United and their support to him during his ban for those betting breaches. And at that point, he had his contract quietly extended as well. And as a consequence, it's going to require a massive fee. Manchester United like Tonali, but we have to wait and see whether it advances. And was he to move in the Premier League, I would expect Arsenal to be in the conversation as well. So yes, it could be a profile to watch. And then, of course, if Tonali goes, to Newcastle sanction a Bruno Guimarães exit or vice versa? I would say relatively unlikely, because they will have brought in good money for one or both of those players. If Gordon goes, another player that has a relatively high valuation. Nick Voltemade, as I've reported on TalkSport with colleague Alex Crook, could be another name available in the summer and is by all accounts struggling to settle at Newcastle. So there may be an openness to sell him. So there's a lot of different avenues here where Newcastle can bring in money if they're having to make sales again for financial reasons. And we're losing PSR and we're heading into squad cost ratios. So all of this could potentially benefit Newcastle as well. And there's almost a slight irony with Newcastle and their finances, because if they bring in good Champions League money this season, but then don't get European football, they'll be under squad cost ratio and be able to spend 85% of their revenue on transfers, agent fees and wages. If they get European football, particularly if it's a lower paying amount of European football, like the UEFA Europa Conference League, then they have to abide by the 70% rule of financial fair play. And the irony is it might put them in a more difficult position, even with squad cost ratio. And that's when they may have to start thinking about selling names. It is true, to my understanding, that Casemiro has raised Bruno Guimarães, but he's outgoing and players don't really run the show as far as recruitment is concerned. So I'm not sure that that will carry a massive amount of weight.
They should do. They should listen to him.
I mean, of course, because he's a world-class player. It's his position. He knows Bruno Guimarães very well. I think if Guimarães left Newcastle as well, he'd be perfectly fine to stay within the Premier League. So we definitely can't discount an exit. But
do you think he'd be open to it?
Well, I mean, he's always been open, despite publicly being a very passionate, very loyal player. But there's always been a willingness to engage with clubs over a potential move within England. And if we go back historically, Man City held some conversations and Arsenal were also interested as well. Now, there was a report out there in the last 24, 48 hours that said City are back and they're advancing. That's not true to my understanding. Man City at the moment have got other targets. So unlike Elliot Anderson, this might be one, if Manchester United did choose to enter the race, where they would have a slightly clearer run. But we are in a position of recruitment where, like we said on the last show, it's not actually about individual names right now. It's about allocating Elliot Anderson and seeing if he's possible, and then working out where the chemistry lies and what the best pairing is from both within and externally in the market. Whereas everyone's taking all these names and going, well, have we advanced on Guimarães? What about Tonali? Is Mainu going to get a new deal? Is Anderson going to Man City? And it's not quite how clubs look at it. You have deep pockets of targets, and right now, of course, they're doing outreach to find out who isn't interested and what the prices might be. But they're also looking at the chemistry and the pairings, and that's where Man United's recruitment for the summer could be slower than Man City, because they also have to establish who the new manager's going to be and whether they're going to wait for that new manager to have input as well. So yes, there's a small amount of substance in the Bruno Guimarães links. There's more in Tonali at this stage. And once again, I'm still led to believe that Elliot Anderson is the top target if Manchester United can get him.
Well, that's quite an interesting update for sure. I don't think Manchester United fans would turn their nose up at any of them options. I mean, all three are absolute top quality players, but at the same time, I think Manchester United fans do have their feet on the ground a little bit, even though Manchester United should be going for the best and should be getting the best. I actually think we do need three midfielders, I'm going to be honest, with the midfield rebuild that we're doing. I think it'd be highly unlikely that you'd manage to secure all of them three. So like you said, there's going to be probably a major signing, and then there's going to be a couple of others. Is there any other outside names that maybe won't be like the huge big money signings that Manchester United are looking at for that area?
Yeah, I think from the list that we're aware of, Angelo Stiller has fallen lower. That's the first thing to say. I'm not saying he's been discounted, but I'm led to believe that Manchester United are not necessarily thinking about triggering that release clause at this stage, even though it becomes active during the summer. I won't repeat myself on Iliman and Jai, other than to reiterate that we've said on previous shows that as versatile as he is and as capable as he is of playing through the centre, he's not quite the profile at this stage that Man United are looking at. And I don't think he would fall into the category as defined specialist left winger compared to other names as well. So we're still talking about an out and out defined number 6. And then in addition to that, you have more of a player that might have started as a 6 and become an 8, or a player that is a defined 8 that could, when necessary, burst into that 10 role in game management, but unlikely to start there, especially if Bruno Fernandes stays at the club. And obviously you've still got Cunha and Bumo and Mason Mount at this stage. The only other name that I've heard, and I'll kind of repeat it from the Garnacho talks, is André Santos. And right now, I think less likely than it was when Man United and Chelsea were negotiating over Alejandro Garnacho, because at that point, Santos was not really getting game time. And now he's playing under a manager that knows him really well from Strasbourg. And as a consequence, Chelsea's not for sale stance, which was said at the time when they were talking over Alejandro Garnacho, is probably one that you would expect them to double down heading into the summer. But if Chelsea bring in another midfielder, you got Enzo Fernandez, who's been pushed forwards. If Romeo Lavia gets fit, Reece James is being played in midfield, and Moises Caicedo is basically undroppable. So Chelsea do have a lot of midfielders, and Manchester United's interest in André Santos also remains. It's just not currently a market opportunity. And because of all these long-term contracts that Chelsea hand out, as it stands at the moment in any negotiation, they've got all of the cards.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting name. I know when that was brought up at the time, a lot of Manchester United fans weren't huge fans of the idea of that, but he definitely has improved, I think. Well, you're going to improve when you get more game time under Liam Rosenior, so it's an interesting one. Daniel Thompson have put a super chat in saying, "Hi Beth and Ben in the United Stand, hope you're doing well and having a good day. Good to see you all. B&B show on a Thursday, always great to see and always a great show." Thank you very much, Daniel Thompson. We really do appreciate your super chat and your contribution. Any questions you have for Ben, please get them in the comments. I want to get your questions to Ben as well, so let me know if you have any. I want to move on a little bit to the fullback area, Ben. I think Newcastle, what they did last night, and I've spoken about this a little bit on previous shows when we're talking about, the post-match aftermath last night, we were talking about this. I think they exposed two weaknesses for Manchester United because of what they have to offer in their team. And that was the lack of the physicality at times in the midfield, which I think they got the better of us on, which is why we need to get midfield depth, because it's not to say that Mainu and Casemiro aren't quality players, because they are, but it's horses for courses. And some games require a different sort of profile, and we need a bit of depth there. And then also, I think another thing that is an area where United need to improve is the fullbacks and the width from the fullbacks, the attacking output. Are fullbacks an area that Manchester United want to go for? And is there any names being floated about for the right side or the left side?
Yeah, obviously Amorim wanted a left-sided fullback and didn't get one, and Manchester United in the summer wanted a hybrid fullback, left wing, left back, and that was where Giovanni Quenda came from. I think we've spoken about this on previous shows, so I won't go into too much detail. Quenda in the end picked Chelsea, and some of that was because Chelsea were prepared to send Quenda back to Sporting for this season, and Man United weren't. But that's the first clue that in that summer they were looking for another immediate left full back that had kind of attacking DNA. But Man United's pitch to Quenda was, you're not a left winger, you're a left wing back. And since then, it has been the left side where they've predominantly looked. But now it wouldn't surprise me if they switch to the right side. So they may still sign a left winger that could drop into that left wing back position, which was obviously the sort of pitch for Semenya. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, and so is spin to an extent. And of course, when a club misses out on a player, they're never going to say our pitch was off. So officially, Manchester United sources say they never wanted Antoine Semenya to be a left wing back, and he was always going to be either a right winger or a left winger. But naturally, when you speak to sort of sources around the player in the build up to him making a decision, some of the information doesn't quite tally with the neat narrative that is often put on a failure to sign a player after the fact. So if you kind of add up the Quenda story plus the Semenya story, my feeling is that twice Manchester United have looked at an attack-minded winger that could drop back into that left wing back position if needed. And if they go down that route, then they protect the pathway of Diego Leon and maybe could turn their attention to the right side instead. Not that it means that much, but on the right side, it is true that Julian Ryerson is a player that Manchester United have tracked. I'm not aware of any formal talks on the player side or anything to suggest it's moving at this stage, but perhaps as they crystallise who they're looking for on the right side, he'll become part of their thinking as well. And again, we've mentioned it on previous shows before, Tino Livramento is a player that the blue half of Manchester seemingly wants, and also a player that Ross Wilson has tried to tie down to a new deal because Newcastle really don't want to lose him. If Livramento became available on the market, I would expect virtually every big six club to be interested, because as long as he stays fit, he's one of the best right backs in the world. He's young. There's no acclimatization necessary, but nothing really to add in terms of Manchester United entering that race, because before we can talk about a potential Livramento exit, you have to understand that Newcastle are still pushing to lock him down to avoid the possibility of any exit in summer 2026.
Yeah, I keep seeing the Tino Livramento to Manchester City links. It makes me upset, Ben. It makes me very upset. You know how much I rate him as a player.
I do think he's serious about Livramento if he becomes available in the market.
If they do sign Livramento, we'll have to do a show right there and then just for the reaction. I mean, honestly, I'd be so frustrated because I feel like he's such a good player that would be missing out on a Premier League proven player. But we digress. I can't get myself in the Manchester United boardroom and say, please do this. I'll just got to wait and see what happens. But Ryerson is a really promising player. I know he's a little bit on, I wouldn't say old, but he's not in that under 26 category that Manchester United usually like to go for. So it's an interesting one.
They won't be as rigid, though, as Chelsea's models. So people often ask me, didn't Jim Ratcliffe want to buy Chelsea? Isn't he really intrigued by the Chelsea model? Yeah, in terms of lowering the average age, longer term contracts. And I sense that's why they went, for example, for Benjamin Sesko, even though Ruben Amorim, I'm not saying he was against Sesko, because managers are often happy with more than one target. But if Amorim was told, like Ten Hag, you've got a veto and can pick your number one choices, then he would have gone Emi Martinez, Ollie Watkins, plus Brian and Mbeumo and Matheus Cunha, to my understanding. But this recruitment model is saying Sesko can grow into his price tag and be a longer term future of this football club than Ollie Watkins, and the same for Sene Lamens. And to be fair, at the moment, Lamens at the back looks outstanding between the sticks, and Sesko's found some form in recent games. So the model's perspective versus Amorim's perspective at the moment would suggest that the model made the right decisions on their goalkeeper and their number 9, because Ollie Watkins actually struggled to score Premier League goals in the last 10 or 12 games. But you look at the point of difference of saying, we are going to sign Matheus Cunha and just pay the release clause with all of the payment terms included. And that wasn't negotiated in the end, despite some early efforts. We are going to bring in Brian and Bumo. We're not afraid to sign a PKH player in their mid-20s or even potentially closer to 30, because Manchester United's model is not only about basically overstocking all of the young talents from the future from all around the world and dining off their successes and making their, in inverted commas, failures, great players they develop that just don't make it at the football club, worth more money than they paid. And Chelsea have always had that academy stream, and this new ownership are just kind of building on that. And it's a little bit of a innovative model because it sort of combines big club in a multi-club with a Red Bull mentality. And it's like a hybrid that's putting as much development and attention on the players that make it as the ones that don't. And you have a big squad. Manchester United like the idea of buying younger and lowering the average age of the squad. That's where the synergy is with Chelsea. But I don't think, to my knowledge anyway, they'll be afraid to make more short-termist signings, because Jim Ratcliffe is also aware that he has to restore the glory days of this football club a lot quicker. Whereas maybe the Chelsea project is more in tune with the Arsenal project, that even though the Chelsea fans don't always like it, if it takes 5, even 7 years for Chelsea to really get dominant within domestic and European football, that ownership's prepared to wait. Whereas we know from Manchester United that within 5 windows, they want to be back to where Jim Ratcliffe was used to as a fan seeing them. So they have to rush a little bit faster than Chelsea and think a bit more short term at times. And that's a point of difference in terms of age of players and recruitment that we might see in the summer. Whereas with Chelsea, I sense, even though their model is now a little bit more mature, they will, on balance and on average, still end up buying younger than Manchester United.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing for me, because I love to buy young players that have a lot of potential. It's always really exciting, but I do think you need that experience in the squad. You do need the players that are ready to go now, the players that are going to get you to the next level, so it can enable the young players to progress. You know, we need to be able to improve now, and I think a balance of them type of players is a really important thing. So that is a good thing to hear. Before, I'm going to lastly ask you about the left winger situation, a little bit about Diomande. But before that, I just wanted to quickly ask about Mason Mount and Ugarte. Do you think they'll be on the way out of Manchester United in the summer? I mean, there's been a few links to Italian clubs for Ugarte, and then also there's been some rumours midweek about Aston Villa or Fulham being interested in Mason Mount. What is your insight on them two players?
Yeah, not necessarily Fulham wage is an issue for Mason Mount, and I'm not so sure that he fits within the wage structure of Fulham. I think Mount was very happy under Ruben Amorim. He was one of the beneficiaries when he was fit, because the manager actually really liked him. And Mount's plan, I'm told anyway, is to wait and see what happens over the summer in a period of upheaval, and how favourable a new manager changes as far as he's concerned. So the jury's still out there, but it's definitely not yet the beginning of the end of Mason Mount and Manchester United. But there is interest, of course, in Mason Mount, and we'll have to kind of see whether any European clubs enter the race as well. With Villa, Emi Buendia has been favoured by Unai Emery, and Harvey Elliott is obviously not going to be signed permanently. There might be room for them to add one more attacker that plays centrally. But Villa's finances are also relatively tight at this stage. So can they afford the kind of package that Mason Mount is looking for? So I think too early to tell on Mason Mount. Manuel Ugarte, it's trending towards an exit in the summer as it stands. And part of that is, of course, because Kobbie Mainoo has come into favour. So there's an extra body in midfield. And if they sign 2 central midfielders, then Ugarte is going to fall further down the pecking order. And not just Italian clubs either. Ajax are another one to watch as far as he's concerned. So there is a realistic possibility that Manchester United become open to offers for Manuel Ugarte over the summer. But with Mason Mount, I think it's just too early to tell, because he's a streaky kind of player. And there's just so many variables. If Bruno Fernandes left, there's another central spot. If the system favours an attacking midfielder over somebody like Xerxes playing behind the lead striker, then again, there's another spot. If Mbeumo or Cunha leads the line a bit more often in Šeško's absence, then there's potentially the ability for another number 10. If Cunha or Mbeumo are used wide right, wide left, then once again, you have the ability for somebody like Mason Mount to get more game time. So I think he's prepared to wait and be patient, see who this new manager is, work out the lay of the land in the early part of the summer, and then we'll have a clearer picture of whether Mason Mount might stay or go.
Yeah, he's definitely one to watch in my opinion. And then for the left wing, just to finish us off, the left wing is an exciting position. Manchester United fans always get excited about them forward type players. I mean, we signed 3 of them in the summer, and Mbeumo, Cunha and Šeško, all really good players and versatile options as well. But Carrick sort of hinted in a recent press conference that they could look at a left wing. I know it's, he doesn't even know if he's going to be there permanently or how long he's going to be there, but there is, quite good indication that Manchester United will go into the market for a left winger come the summer. Is Diomande the favourite, and is there any other name sort of on that list for United?
Yeah, Diomande is one of the leading targets put forwards by Christopher Vivell, and I think there is a realistic possibility that Manchester United go big. I'm relatively confident that there will be a left wing arrival, regardless of the new manager and any tweaks to system potentially. And this is no surprise, because like I said before, when they've looked in the past at Semenya for likely the left side, even though he's properly two-footed, and Quenda, it's all evidence that they want another body over on that left-hand side. So Diomande is definitely the one to watch as far as Man United are concerned. Tottenham as well, but very difficult for them to compete with Manchester United at this stage for a player of his calibre. And price, again, is another aspect. So it's obviously one thing saying that Manchester United historically have been charged this so-called Manchester United tax, and that they're trying to move away from overpaying. But in a case-by-case basis, if you can just go out and get your top target and overpay a little bit, it can be an advantage, because it might be the difference between you striking a deal or not. And when you're dealing with a Red Bull club, you do often have to overpay. But I think also what gives Man United confidence with Yan Diomande is that after AFCON, nobody came in, nobody put crazy money on the table, nobody tried to change Leipzig's perspective, which is that they're only going to engage over the summer. And now as we enter into the summer, suitors still feel that this 100 million euros price tag will come down a little bit, and the player will be a little bit more affordable and valuable. And if that price does drop, especially in an inflated market, it could be a deal that Manchester United progress with. So he is for sure one of the leading targets on the left-hand side. And we'll wait and see now whether that advances before the season in terms of starting to hold talks with the player camp, or whether Manchester United waits, because of course in the early part of the summer to get early business done, you're still in this PSR cycle. And that might mean delaying these deals, as they did with Cunha. They got it done early in May, but the contract was July, and that allowed Manchester United to put the first of 3 instalments onto the next financial year, which was more palatable as far as the books were concerned. So I know it kind of sounds like all the answers are just, we'll have to wait a few months, but that's the nature of how this works. You finish your January window, your February and your mid-March period are traditionally quiet, and even more so when a football club doesn't have a new manager at stake. As I've said before, Njai for me is going to be difficult to get out of Everton. He's not an out-and-out left winger. Anthony Gordon is a name that's appreciated, and Arsenal really like Gordon as well. And I do think, by the way, there'll be a mad race for Morgan Rogers as well in this summer. I'm not led to believe that Manchester United have entered that race as of now. It's perhaps more one for Liverpool and Chelsea at this stage. And he's not a left winger either, but I think if a market opportunity at a decent rate, because maybe Villa need to sell, presents itself for Morgan Rogers, there'll again be several Premier League clubs interested, because that kind of profile is just too good to turn down. But as of now, the profiles they're looking at are more specialist, out-and-out left wingers. And I do think that Yan Diomande is one of the leading names.
I really like Yan Diomande. I've watched him a little bit and he's so exciting, especially for his age range. So that is a good little bit of information there. I'm excited to see what happens in the summer. Although I do remember, and of course this is no journalist's fault, it's literally just following the news, when Man United, it felt like we were going to sign Michael Olise, and it's sort of all U-turn. So things can happen, but Yan Diomande is for sure a name that does get me excited as a Manchester United fan. It's one to watch for the summer. And then you talk about there a little bit about market opportunities. Just quickly, say if Forest was to go down, do you think Morgan Gibbs White could be an opportunity that United sort of can't really pass up, even though we're not crying out for that profile? He's such a good player, and with a little bit of maybe a cheaper rate because of the relegation. I'm not saying he would definitely leave if they get relegated, but could that be a market opportunity that we look at?
Yeah, it hasn't been at this stage. I mean, they're aware of the option, but that's just recruitment experts doing their job. There's been no formal approaches to the player side or to Forest. But when Gibbs White signed his new deal, after that whole release clause saga with Tottenham, you would think that loyalty will be repaid. And if Forest go down and Gibbs White finds an opportunity, the club won't necessarily stand in his way. It will be difficult financially, and it will be tough because the players invested extra time at that football club just when it looked like he was out the door and off to Spurs. But not, as you rightly say, necessarily the priority profile that Manchester United are seeking at this stage, and not necessarily a player, because he is still contracted long term, that will be dead cheap. We don't know if there's another kind of secret release clause there or anything. We're not led to believe that there is. I think part of the point in rewarding Morgan Gibbs White was to try and remove any uncertainty, including contractual uncertainty, and give Forest more control over the situation. But Forest won't have planned to go down. They won't have planned to lose Edu. They won't have planned for a lot of things that they're currently facing at the moment. So for me, and it is just a personal view, it would be a big surprise if Forest went down, if come the start of next season, Elliot Anderson and Morgan Gibbs White were still at the football club. And naturally, if suitors realise that, there will be a relatively competitive race for both of them. But if I had to pick at this stage, if Man United were only to get one Forest player or try for one Forest player, it's clear that Elliot Anderson is higher than Morgan Gibbs White. It's just the fact that Elliot Anderson and Gibbs White are going to be such big market opportunities if Forest goes down that you'd be surprised if there weren't several clubs from within England and beyond that were chasing their signature. But I think Anderson is the top target for Manchester United in any position, by the way, not just central midfield, in any position. He's the number one name that they want to bring in. That doesn't mean they're going to get him. It doesn't mean that Man City aren't going to be equally as aggressive, but Anderson is the top target in any position that Manchester United, to my knowledge anyway, would like to bring in the summer.
As it should be, and that gives me a little bit of hope going into the summer, because United haven't always got the recruitment spot on, but last summer I thought we did really well in terms of the players we ended up bringing in, and Elliot Anderson being our top target. We need to deliver it, and I want him to see him holding up a Man United shirt. I'm not 100% certain that's going to happen, but him being a top target is, in my opinion, how it should be. So thank you very much, Ben, for all of your updates. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's absolutely flown by. I've loved getting involved in the B&B show, and thank you everyone for watching. Smash a like on the video if you've not already. I mean, I would ask you for your score prediction, but we're out the FA Cup, unfortunately, so we will not be playing. But if you do want to get some FA Cup action on That's Football this week, it is FA Cup weekend, and Mark is doing back-to-back watch-alongs for you on Saturday. At 5:45 p.m, you've got Wrexham versus Chelsea, followed by Newcastle versus Manchester City at 8 p.m, and that's all on That's Football. But before that, it's Bundesliga Friday, and it is Bayern Munich versus Mount and Ugarte, and it is a 7:30 kickoff. Not just a watch-along, you get to watch the game too alongside Goldbridge. So start off your That's Football weekend on Friday night. So yeah, make sure you're there, everyone. And Ben, I'll just wish you a very, very good weekend. I hope you're having a good one.
Yeah, have a great week, everyone. Have some downtime, and I look forward to speaking again in 7 days.
Yes, I cannot wait. Thank you so much for all the amazing updates, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We will see you on the next one.